word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling choicey adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us in the section that we're reading.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. Think of us as your drunk weekly book club.
Crossland forced me to read the intro today because he bit his lip and then took a shot of vodka, which hurt his lip, apparently.
Wow, you sold me out so quick there.
What else was I going to do? Of course I did.
I mean, I get that it's filler, but it doesn't have to be immediate filler. You can say any other number of things.
Pretty much always going to be something like that. Anytime you make me do something because you hurt yourself, I'm going to call it out.
Yeah, okay. Well, I got a fat lip, and it kind of sucks, but I'm speaking around it today as best as I can. So today we'll be discussing chapter 34 through 38, the first half of Reaper, part 4 of book 1 of Red Rising. But before we dive into the book, let's talk about what we're drinking. What are you having, PJ?
Mine is not a cocktail this week. I'm not even going to try to argue it this time. It's just larceny bourbon.
Ooh, that's different.
Just a nice clean pour, straight in a little tumbler glass. Have not tasted it yet.
Ooh, well, taste it and tell us what you taste.
It's real fucking smooth, man. A little bit of almost like brown sugar note to it. I've been drinking a lot of rye lately, so I'm like expecting that sort of spice, and it's not there, which makes sense because it's not rye, but just a nice, smooth bourbon. You're coming in next week, or 2 weeks from now, and I'll have to share some with you. But what are you drinking?
I am drinking. What are you chasing with?
It's a double IPA from Blackstack called Sponge Bath.
Ah.
The background is like bright blue with rubber duckies all over it.
I thought for sure it was going to be an homage to SpongeBob, but
nope.
Sponge Bath, of course, also makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Nice and pillowy, or like frothy. I don't know.
Frothy, pillowy. That makes sense. I'm having kind of a usual, so to speak. It's not really that usual, but it's definitely a favorite of mine. I'm having 2 Crossland-sized fingers of Glenlivet 12.
Good deal.
Just delicious. One of my favorite scotches. For the price, I should say. It's on the more, I mean, it's not more expensive, but it's a good mid-tier, mid-price scotch. From the store at a bar, you'll pay like $14-ish a pour. Yeah, I don't know. Speaking of random tangent, I spent fucking $11 on a tap Stella at an airport.
Why?
I didn't realize it was fucking $11. That's why. You order a tap beer, you think it's going to be like $6 or $7 maybe because it's an airport, but it's 11.
Yeah,
I've never had it be 11. I was outraged.
Yeah,
needless to say, the Jameson shot that I had the Jameson double that I had was $1 more. It was $12.
Yeah,
and I was like,
sounds
what
about
the
right.
fuck am I doing?
Well done. All right,
it was
nice
at the
nice little
airport.
loop right there.
Yeah,
Harrisburg was the offender of the $11 Stella.
Yeah, fucking stupid. Anyway, I'm chasing that with because I got back late last night and I had to work hard today, chasing that with a White Claw Black Cherry.
I think that's what you did last time too, wasn't it?
And
I think last time you did.
No. I have made a drink with White Claw before previously. I think that was in episode 3. I did a White Claw gin and tonic.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
I think you just had a mango White Claw for one of them.
I think I had a mango White Claw chaser in one of the episodes as well.
I think it was one of the ones we posted this week. Anyway.
Oh shit, you're probably right. But I also have a lime White Claw to follow that up with because they're small. So there are 2. Anyway, it's cool. Here we are.
All right.
With that, let's get into the book. So this week is really, really interesting. I'd say there's a stark cut here in part 4 that is very different from the rest of the book. It kind of moves from a lot of vague concepts into very quick, very rapid segmentation of like plot chunks. So it kind of jumps from like, okay, so now we're doing this, now we're conquering this, now we're strategizing about this, now we're doing that. So it's very event driven, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which I like. I think that it's done really well, but it is kind of a not, I wouldn't call it a departure, but it's a sort of change. It moves us through the action and the seasons a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So we pick up where the last section left off, of course, a dying Darrow in a ditch being rescued by a woman. We, at first, he speculates that it's EO and is sort of hazed, but it's actually Mustang. Were you surprised?
I would like to back up one step and read the intro.
Okay. Okay. I thought you were going to want that.
I mean...
Yeah. We get it. You're sucker for staccato sentences.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. Before
or are you
that,
talking
I'm
the
talking
actual...
the under part 4 Reaper.
Oh, okay. So you wanted to start with the little line right at the beginning of part 4.
I did. Should I read it?
Yep.
Part 4 Reaper. The elder women of Lycos say that when a man is bitten by a pit viper, all the poison must be drawn out of the bite, for the poison is wicked. When I was bitten, Uncle Nero left some in on purpose. I don't know if we talked about that previously. I know it was mentioned in the book previously. I think that's a quote from earlier, even.
I don't know if it's
if not a direct quote, but a similar like concept that was already touched on. Yes, I don't know if we ever talked about it in the podcast, but either way, I think it's a real good sort of lead into this chapter and some of the things that transpire and how just fucking brutal Darrow can be if he wants to be.
Yeah, how so?
I feel like we'll get into it pretty naturally. Okay. If we just start from there and keep that in mind.
I do agree with you, though. I feel like it's a great metaphor for the way that this goes. And I think it's interesting to use a quote from a character to kind of introduce a concept versus in the beginning of like a part or a book or things like that you might break things up into versus using a like external quote and bringing it in from the outside to explain kind of the modus operandi of a section.
Mm-hmm.
It's very typical in other literature to, start a book off or start anything else off with a quote from someone else.
I feel like that's almost at this point a little bit cliched. I don't know for sure, but I remember a lot of my reading from like high school and college, like a lot of chapters would start out that way. Would be a poem or a real iconic part of a speech or something that wasn't tied to the book itself, but was on the same message, so to speak.
I don't think that's even close to worn out.
Cliche, I guess, was probably the wrong term, but common.
Yeah, an expectation, of course. Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think that there are chunks of it that are. One of the books that I can think of that does something similar to this off the top of my head is in various chunks of the Dark Tower series later in the books. They use some internal quotes, but in the early books, it's all external, but later it kind of comes back full circle. Anyway, just an example. Yeah,
I appreciated that. We kind of open up with him dying again.
it's kind of a common theme throughout these sections. Yeah.
Yeah. And I genuinely believed it was EO that he thought he was seeing, or he thought he was seeing EO. I genuinely thought it was her, but pleasantly, I don't know about pleasantly, but not unpleasantly surprised that it was Mustang.
Yeah, it's kind of a different twist on your expectations, considering that, obviously he had made the choice to save her life earlier, and it kind of comes back full circle where she decides to kind of nurse him back to health. Mm-hmm. But throughout the section, she kind of plays it as though she always kind of had the intention of potentially siding with him if he could calm down.
Yeah, I don't know if I can believe that. I think that a message like that is easy to say, but knowing how these games have always worked within the last year or so of them, like it's always been brutal. It's always been kind of last man standing, everyone out for themselves, even within houses. I think that's probably a perspective that she has, or a perspective that she held only after being spared by him.
I'd agree with you. I think that it's interesting, obviously, that she's compared to Io, right? And he thinks about her kind of as Io, like, wait, no, I'm missing the golden sigils and everything else. And I feel like that's kind of a theme that gets repeated throughout the chapter, or the entire part that we're talking about today.
It is a part, isn't it? Part 4.
Yeah, we don't talk through the entirety of the part 4, but yeah, that's something that's a little bit different.
Right. It's tough to know what to call it. Is it a section? Is it a book? Is it a chapter?
Yeah, I feel like if it were a web like serial, this would be called book 4. But Low, it is not. But yeah, anything else surprise you? Yeah, Low. It was Shakespearean. Low? I did. Come on. All right. I'm in on the high speech, man.
All right. Very way to make it relevant. So she kind of starts singing what do they call it? Persephone's song or whatever.
Song of Persephone. Yep.
Which I really thought there was going to be I thought she was going to reveal that she knew Io or knew of Io and who he actually is.
She knows of the martyrdom of Io.
Right. I meant more specifically in relation to Darrow. And that Darrow has a connection to her. But it's just kind of coincidence. Maybe not actual coincidence, but she doesn't know. If that makes sense. How do I describe that? Not coincidence in the fact that he and she get along because of her similarities in personality to Io, and she kind of holds on to that message for similar reasons as well.
Yes. Yeah. Which is interesting. And I think that speaks to kind of her character. I definitely want to get into this more. I feel like we get a lot more to break this down nearer to the end of the chapter. So we should revisit this in a second. So one of the things that I find, one of the things that I like here is that they do kind of compare the victory messages, so to speak, throughout the section between Io and Mustang, right? Like that's almost immediate in the way that a lot of these things are handled. So he talks about like her strategy being very similar to Io's. Specifically in 268, they have a discussion about both of their ascensions to being the Primus, right? So no one in your house would have betrayed you, Darrow says, but I didn't rule like you. You have to remember, people don't like being told what to do. You can treat your friends like servants and they'll love you, but you tell them they're servants and they'll kill you. And it's lines like that are great, that harken back to kind of I don't want to say Mustang thinks differently, not similar to Darrow, but she thinks differently than a lot of other Golds think.
Right. And she's always been kind of that different personality from the very beginning when he first sees her in the locker room and they both kind of blush and look away when they're naked, which was not something that Golds typically did, I guess, which starts sowing some seeds of questions of if Io or if Mustang is actually another red.
Ooh. Okay. Let me get to the next bit. Okay. We'll jump back because I think that's an interesting conversation to have. So obviously there's a conversation that feeds into what you're saying where she says live for more on 269. What a beautiful flashback here in that conversation with Darrow, like having those memories flood back, and also the emotions kind of hit home with us. Pierce kind of sets them up to be compared, which is a genius as it's written. And even the allegory between her way of leading the house and Io's dream itself is interesting, where it's a lot more kind of democratic as far as ideas go. And, instead of creating slaves, we create followers. What do you think of that whole bit? Which speaks to your doubt, your sowing seeds of doubt as well.
Yeah, that in combination with her calling out Io as an off-color name without really giving it much pushback with his like, oh, didn't you hear I'm a far world, whatever, far planet hayseed.
Yep.
Like there's so much wrong with the story that EO's setting, or that Jesus. Why do I keep saying EO?
Because you think
that Darrow's setting forth.
Oh, okay.
So much like if anybody were like if the arch governor were having this conversation with Darrow, he would see right through everything. I think, and I think most Golds would. But she's either intentionally letting it go for the sake of letting him have his secrets or whatever, or she's genuinely not noticing his lies. And she seems too smart for that, too cunning for things like that. So with her singing the song of Persephone, her dropping the live for more phrase, like there's just a dense, and maybe it's just done as a way of like kind of beating it over the head that Mustang reminds Darrow of EO, but maybe it's her dropping subtle hints without actually saying out loud that she knows a little bit more than what she's leading on about Darrow's past.
So the hard part here is to not say anything, obviously.
I know.
But what I think is interesting based on what you're saying, I want you to imagine the what if not what you just said scenario. So what if she has no idea about Darrow? What's her motivation behind thinking this way? Why does she think differently than other Golds? I'm not disowning that. I just want to hear your disconnected hypothesis.
Just interactions with lower colors in her upbringing. Maybe she fell in love with rust, not rust. What's the higher level of red? I don't know.
I think it's just called high red.
High red, sure.
Yeah, high red, low red.
But falling in love with a servant at her home as a Gold, and like realizing that they're people and that they've been treated like shit, and probably undeservedly so, and that a lot of the Golds are in power for the sake of being in power because of who they were born into, and like understanding the problems with the hierarchy that she's been born into and wanting to do something better.
Yeah.
Do something to change that. Kind of having that in her mind as she's growing kind of forms her personality around that central idea. And maybe produces someone like that.
Totally. And I think both assumptions are great and like good to go down in terms of like ideologies. I agree with you. I think I lean towards believing that in my own head, I lean towards believing that she had some kind of inside information on Darrow and or was a red in my first read. It just seemed like everything at the time kind of feels like it's lining up in the same way that it did with Titus, but more gradually, except for some of the stories that are told, right? I feel like one of the giveaway stories that she tells that leads us to believe that she's perhaps a red also is the story of how she lost her brother, and how similar that kind of is in some degree to Darrow losing a sibling as well. Or not a sibling, losing EO. Jeez. Losing EO, right? So it's kind of a similar compassionate loss story,
right?
In that kind of way. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. It's also the other thing that I'm thinking about and don't really have any solid grasp on or solid connection to is whatever EO said to her sister before her execution.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like could have been passing information on to someone like Mustang.
PJ, you're becoming such a good observant reader. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. No, that's a really good callback because we actually don't know what she said.
No, it's never been mentioned.
It has never been revealed up until this point. Yeah, that's a great call. It does pose a big question mark.
Right. But with the similarities between EO and Mustang, I feel like that could be a connection somehow.
Sure.
Familially.
Sure. Are there any other connections that you would draw?
Probably, but I don't know.
None that you can think of right now?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, cool.
Oh, if I come across another one, I will make sure to stop everything in its tracks and just say, oh, another connection right there.
Probably mention it. Okay. Cool. So I want to kind of skip over the Oathbreakers for now because we get an entire chapter on them, and I feel like this almost belongs in that chapter. But we'll get back to that section.
Okay.
I want to talk about Fitchner first, and then we'll talk about the Oathbreakers all together. We actually hear the full version of Persephone's song, right?
Yes.
Which is great on audiobook. May I recommend?
All right. Good to know.
For those that have the access to it, it is fantastic. I believe it was also released on YouTube so that it can be listened to. If you search Song of Persephone Red Rising, it's been covered at least a half a dozen times. I'm going to have to cut this if it's not accurate, but I believe Lindsay Sterling also made a violin version for someone else singing it. So it's like, it has like a legit semi following, which is cool. Anyway, what do you think of the actual poetry of this section? Because it's very different, and we get kind of the full song, all of the verses included. Was there anything you pulled out of the song?
What you just said kind of hits it. It is straight up poetry. More than lyrics, it is straight poetry. I had a hard time really trying to think of how to put music to it, but it is a beautifully written poem. I'd like to listen to that, or a variety of those recordings that you mentioned that kind of put it to music, but just to see how it differs from my own thoughts. But it's a gorgeous song. Just speaking to the way that it's written kind of like an Irish ballad. So it does kind of have a sort of meandering. In all honesty, some of the pacing reminds me of the theme of Harry Potter, of all things, but a little bit slower, a little bit more. It's got kind of that Irish. It almost feels like it'd be bleak.
Yes, it is. It's what's the song? Oh, Danny Boy. The pipes.
Okay. Yeah,
similar. Yeah. So if you think of that, it's got a kind of similar tone to it in the way that it's written, saying everything else. It's very much like an ode or a ballad.
Yeah, I could see that.
But anything you pull from the words.
Expecting more of a conversation on the use of the word Reaper.
Yeah.
And the fact that Darrow is the Reaper in this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In this game. What is it? A game? Trial?
It's a game, a test. For some of the golds, it feels like a game. For Darrow and the people who are like trying for Primus, it's more of a test. You know? Mm-hmm. It kind of varies depending on what you're going for.
And whose perspective you're looking from.
Yep.
It definitely is set up to be game-like with a winner.
Yeah, it's gamified reality, kind of like Ender to some degree, right? Ender didn't know, of course, spoilers.
But he is mentioned.
Yeah, he actually is in this. He's name-checked. Wiggin is name-checked in this section.
Yep.
Which is
I found phenomenal. Really funny that he's on the front cover. Ender is on the front cover, and Wiggin is called out as somebody to So this kid is what? General. A predestined Alexander, a Caesar, a Genghis, a Wiggin? Mm-hmm. I ask. Slagging nonsense.
Yep. Fucking obviously like we need to talk about the Fitchner conversation in full. Right. But any other comments on the Reaper? Obviously, there's the allegory between Darrow being the Reaper and the title of the chapter being the Reaper, and obviously this is the Reaper's song. What do you think about those connections?
The other thing is winter. Are they kind of in the midst of winter right now? I think it's winter time.
Yeah, no. They're like just at the start of winter, and then they hit like deep winter as this chapter and section proceeds forward.
So the talk of the seasons kind of lining up with what's happening in the story. Mm-hmm. My son, remember the burn when leaves were fire and seasons turned. We fell and sang a song to weave a cell all autumn long. Hear the reapers sing a tale of winter long is the end of that verse, mm-hmm. which I would like to take as sort of preemptive, a prelude to like, this is the time for Darrow, the winter is when he's going to be rising and coming into power, truly.
Okay.
I don't know if that was intended, but that's what I'm positing right now.
I can tell you something really interesting. This is kind of a fun fact about Pierce Brown's style. I've read and watched so many things about him talking about writing. Obviously, I'm fascinated as a exploring writer as well. And so one of the things that he does, one of his processes when he's trying to get over writer's block or get over like a character problem, first he takes a glass of a pour of whiskey, he downs it to start. Second, he immediately starts to do like word association, creating a word map of what he thinks the character is, or like some of the raw words that he kind of attaches with the character. And then his third step is he writes a flourishy, non-important poem, just brief, maybe 5 lines, 6 lines or whatever, to explain whatever it is about the character that he wants to get out. But he has to use those words and connect them in some way. So with word association, he kind of creates this sort of mental image and mental poetry of the character and moves it that way and in that direction. And I think especially in the Reaper song, just as you picked apart, that is so evident here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm now convinced. Is that all it took? I'm right.
Yeah. I think that's like early fascination to some degree. Like the people who watch all that stuff will understand. But yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting technique. And for the most part, he doesn't actually put the poems in. But this is his first book. And naturally, the Reaper song, the Song of Persephone, is so important to EO, to the dream, to everything else, that actually having it in there is important. So I can't help but agree with you in your prospect. I don't know if that's true. And if that's the way that he set out to do this, is he wrote the poem and then decided that was going to be the structure for the end of the book. I can see
the
that
way
going
I'm
either
taking
way.
it. It almost feels like a prophecy.
Okay.
Is the way I'm looking at it. Like when leaves were fire and seasons turned, we fell and sang a song. I'm assuming the leaves would be the children, and it's tumbling and it's chaotic and everything's kind of meshing together and floating down to the ground. Fire being kind of aggressive, and leaves don't last long but burn very brightly.
Very true. And Mars, similarly, is described as burning very brightly.
Yeah. So I like to think that I'm right now.
Okay.
You know,
all right.
I'm going to leave it at that.
We'll move forward from there. So we get to Fitchner, right? So we move from the conversation about that. We'll talk about the Oath Breakers and some of the interactions in the cave and kind of the way that goes in the second year. I think it's important to talk about with the way the next chapter goes. But Fitchner, what do you think about the conversation with Fitchner? Fitchner obviously spills a big secret inside of a silent bubble with Darrow, which is interesting. The Proctors are cheating to help the Jackal win.
Right. And clearly, I think it's more clear here than ever that Fitchner doesn't want to come out and say, like, hey, I'm helping you and trying to, like, fix what the rest of the Proctors are doing by giving you this information, and kind of coyly playing like, oh, no, I didn't mean to let out this information. I think he knows that Darrow's smart enough to understand that he's kind of stuck in his place as a Proctor, not really able to change anything about how the game is being played. Also sees kind of the injustice that's being done by, I don't know, fixing it.
Right. He's clearly frustrated with kind of the hypocrisy of the entire society being based around meritocracy. Meanwhile, you know, you can effectively pay for winners in the way that it's been rigged in the Mars Institute with Nero Augustus's child.
Right. I think Darrow took even more information than Fitchner was trying to give him, though.
Do you think he was limiting
information? No, I'm saying his Darrow very slyly gaining information on the like pulse shields and stuff, and their ability to turn it on and off at will, the location of the device that produces the shield, all kind of small but important pieces of information that most people probably don't have. Or maybe they do. Maybe most golds do because of their upbringing with, I don't know, technology like that around them. And Darrow's just kind of catching up to understanding how a pulse shield works and where it's worn and how it can be turned on and off. I don't know about that, but the fact that he was able to gain that information, I think it was really important to him. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily what Fitchner was setting out to give him.
I agree with you on the side of the information that he acquired kind of by his own vision, sight, other things like that. What I think is also interesting is that we're given also the perspective of strategy that is Darrow for the rest of the section, right? His goal has changed from winning and beating other students to how do I eliminate proctors that are helping the students to cheat against me? Right.
I liked the proctors gave it to the jackal. He tells me, which ones? Apollo. All of us. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, right. It's Apollo. Like, take out Apollo first.
that is kind of a nice obvious like jab at Apollo, especially because Apollo was one of the people that was looking at him early and passed him over, right? So it feels extra. You know, Darrow was obviously drafted in the first round effectively, but ultimately not a first draft for that house. You know, we also, you know, it's interesting because Fitchner also kind of gives him an out, right? He says that there are a number of people that are going to be very successful, and Darrow doesn't have to win necessarily because Lornau Arcos, the Rage Knight, Sword of House Mars, previously has taken to him, right? And he's the third most powerful man. He's already betrayed Cassius, kind of, in the Bologna family, with killing Julian, so he's probably not in there. And he doesn't probably want to be in close proximity with Nero Augustus because of the bullshit that's happened there, obviously, with the killing of Io, even though Augustus doesn't know that. So third place probably feels pretty good, especially with someone who is a knight attendant to the sovereign.
Right. Speaking of, we also know that everyone else knows that he's been also lying to Cassius. Not only has he killed Julian. Mm-hmm. So doubly so, probably doesn't want to spend time with the Bolognas.
Right.
Rage Knight seems pretty fucking chill as far as like a boss goes.
Feels like a good option.
Feels like a good fit for him so far, but also isn't necessarily the position that he wants to get to, right?
Like, I feel like that's
if he was actually setting out to live in gold society and be a like high rank in gold, yes, that's great. But I think he wants more power than that.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that front. I think that he definitely is seeking the maximum position from the Institute, and he sees third place as a distant third, not as though like he feels like he could win and he should strive to win because of his circumstances and situation. So he's not willing to settle for it. But all things considered, it's definitely kind of a win for him to go for something like that, you know? Right. Like, even if that's like his last option, that's better than dying like Titus.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. It makes me really wonder what Titus's actual plan was.
I think he was just so consumed by rage that he couldn't see through it or see past it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you'd think he'd need something a little bit more than that to get as far as he did, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think he was just an instrument of rage who they thought might peel through in some way. But it also, you know, who's to say who put him in there, for what reason, and why? So, anything else on Fitchner?
He drops the fact that his ring is a camera. Mm-hmm. Biometric nanocam. Like he gave him so much detailed information on how this game is being observed. And the fact that there's people that edit everything, it's on a half-day delay. Like, he knows a lot about the back end of this thing.
I don't know if you remember the Hunger Games so well.
I don't.
I know you didn't read them.
Never saw it.
You never saw them either? You didn't read them or see them?
I might have seen the first one, but...
Jesus Christ. Okay, so there's a character, Haymitch, who reminds me of Fitchner a lot. Okay. He's a drunk And, he's there. He's a survivor of the Hunger Games. In a previous year, he won. So he's one of the 24, he was the only one that survived out of 24 kids. And Fitchner, to some degree, reminds me of him, where it's like, you want to let your person know as much as you can as possible, but also like they have to face a brutal reality and you have to face the brutal reality of what's to come. So I feel like Fitchner isn't really holding anything back at this point because he knows that Darrow's worth that additional knowledge and that he'll take advantage of it going forward. But it's interesting. We get a final note, though, on the Fitchner conversation, which I think warrants conversation as well. He hands him the Pegasus locket of his house that has the Hemanthus blossom locked inside. Where do you think that came from? Who gave that to Fitchner? Who delivered that? It's so personally important to Darrow.
First thought would be Severo.
How would Severo know? And how would Severo get it to Fitchner? Not that I disagree. I just want to explore your
he's
theory.
always had it. He's had it with him.
The locket got stripped from him during the passage.
Did it?
I'm pretty sure.
I thought he had it during, while he was in the Institute. Maybe I'm completely mistaken.
He might have lost it at some point.
Because I thought he brought it in with him to the Institute.
So he loses it in the passage, and then he gets it back now of all times. And it kind of feels like a reassurance of faith to some degree. In that kind of sort of familial, not friendly, but familial and personal way. And it feels strange for that to be coming from Fitchner because he is more the wisdom, advice, intelligence sort of person on the team.
Right. But we do now know about how extensive their sort of surveillance is of things. Maybe he was seen taking comfort with this previously, and it was in his personal effects. And Fitchner knew maybe it would give him some hope going forward. Yeah. I like to think that Fitchner is in on the Sons of Ares.
Yeah? Tell me more.
I don't have anything connecting them. I have no solid evidence, but they would know about this object. Who gave him the Pegasus to begin with? It was Dancer, right?
Yep.
Dancer's pretty big deal within that organization. Probably has some pull outside of that organization as well. And if Fitchner's kind of in on that, that'd be a good sort of silent sign and silent passing of understanding and knowledge of the Sons of Ares.
Sure.
Without having to say it out loud.
Yeah. I think that's... Go ahead.
That flower is completely subterranean as well, isn't it?
I don't know that it is, but it definitely blooms subterranean.
It would have some pretty huge implications of who he's actually dealing with if Fitchner knows that he even has ties to the subterranean Reds, let alone being one.
Of course that would have huge.
Was that intended for, from Fitchner's point of view? Do you think that was? I think that could have been intended to be a hey, I know, I'm with you. Let's fucking do this kind of gift.
Confirmed that it's not underground.
Oh,
it just blooms on Mars.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Either way, I don't know. It seems like it'd be either straight up from Fitchner and House Mars as a whole, having had some surveillance and knowing that that object brought him comfort, or ties to Dancer.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as far as that goes. I feel like they're both, the Pegasus is the symbol of his house right now, Andromedus, which, while it is a far hayseed and they're pulling it off as this thing where the family has died and doesn't exist, it's likely that the family did exist, right?
Oh,
and
it did.
That society.
he was supposed to take on the name of that child.
Right. So
they all died, and supposedly he was going to be the only survivor.
Yep.
And he fought to keep his name, and they changed the records so that kid had the name of Darrow.
Definitely. So I think that it's interesting because
I hadn't thought about that.
The Hamanthus means nothing, and the symbol of the house, like it's flower, of course, it's like a rose to us, Mm-hmm. And the Pegasus symbol is just the symbol of his house, right? So what does that mean to Fitchner?
I hadn't thought about the fact that makes it a little bit more innocent and less. That makes me, because he has to say the name EO for it to open up to show the petal. Mm-hmm. So
not that Fitchner would know that either way.
No, Fitchner wouldn't know that, but he would know about his family and that the Pegasus was the symbol of his house. And this was probably more of a, here's a little creature comfort from home. That makes me less conspiracy theory coming through.
Okay.
More just like, this is something that would bring you comfort because it's the symbol of your fallen family.
Yeah. Which is, a big deal to these people. Right.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And even though it would have been misplaced in his intentions of giving him the Pegasus to remind him of his family, he's still giving him the contents of the Pegasus to remind him of the family. So regardless of his intentions, he's giving him something very meaningful and a reminder of home.
Of course. Cool. Well, we talked a lot about that. I was actually shocked about how long that went on. Which is good because there's a lot there to break down with Fitchner. So that's a good combo. So let's talk about Chapter 35, Oathbreakers. And part of Chapter 35, like I said, I kind of cut out the conversation about the initial raid on the cave that happened. Mostly because it felt like it was in the chapter to spice up the chapter a little bit, to give it some meat.
I agree. It didn't seem like it was necessary, but it did kind of accelerate the action.
I think it was kind of necessary. So what I would say,
the scene itself but it would have made more sense in this chapter, I think.
I do, and I don't think so. So I see where you're coming from with it. What I would say is that getting the introduction to the Oathbreakers in the previous chapter is good, because when they get let go, so just for an explanation's sake, basically the two people, slaves that had left the capture that are bound to be shamed people from the Institute, have decided to raid the cave that Darrow and Mustang are in. They catch tracks of them early, and it kind of happens. Ultimately, Darrow catches them off guard as they're looking to potentially rape Mustang, and he and she let them free, either taking their hot knives and stabbing them and probably killing them with them, or going out and facing the snow. Right. And I feel like some of that plays into Mustang's methodology with how she approaches the Reaper and the mythology of the Reaper and the strategy behind using the Reaper. So I think it's a bit deeper than, and that's why it's important to lay those seeds early, is because they're going to run out. They might run into other people and tell the story. Right. Which is why I think you'd put it in the chapter previous. Mm-hmm. Versus keeping it all in one. But all told, it could all be in one too. So
yeah, I guess that's a good point, though.
You plant it early for the payoff a little bit later, but
yeah. And I don't have an actual complaint about it, but that makes sense. I really kind of wanted to see Darrow murder him.
Yeah.
But, I think it leads into a better story, the fact that he doesn't.
He could have. He definitely could have.
He wanted to.
Yeah, no, he definitely did.
He really wanted to, because he was convinced that they would get raided, letting them go.
Yeah, and he thought that was going to be the worst thing. He was like, whatever, they come here, it's winter, what are they going to get? Like a fire? Okay, neat. And I think Mustang's voice of reason here, even though sick at the time, is interesting. But yeah. So I feel like a lot of this chapter is pretty straightforward. The way the breakers are gathered, first almost causing a rumor, like it said earlier, by letting the Reaper go 2 of them. And later when they befriended Milia is very interesting. Befriended / ambushed. What do you think of the entire operation as it went with the Oathbreakers?
So, first of all, the existence of the Oathbreakers was really interesting to me in that I was unsure of the mechanics of the slavery, I guess. I didn't realize that they had the free will to disobey, you know?
Yes.
I wasn't sure if it was some sort of magic or, I don't know, some sort of compulsion to serve the house. And I didn't quite understand why they would just choose to serve until the explanation of like these shamed breakers of the slaves, like breakers of their own slavery. But in doing so, they're probably never going to get anywhere in life. Right?
Right. By choosing to free themselves in the instance of the Institute, they're effectively losing any claim that they might have on anything that they did successfully inside of the Institute. So they lose. Yeah, they are the worst of the worst at that point because they aren't following the rules. Wherein the enslaved are, it's kind of like being tagged in tag. Like it's all good faith, right? When someone hits you on the back, you're like, oh shit, well I'm it now. And it's just a series of I'm it's. And they've baked it into society so far that there's this aggressive I'm it slave culture where it's like, oh, I have to go chop down fucking trees until this year is over and someone wins. Like I'm going to end up someone's slave unless my house is in control.
Right. So it was something that I had never considered, that because I had just assumed that there was some sort of compulsion. The fact that there was a sigil that kind of embedded itself in the forehead of any of the slaves made me think that maybe there's something controlling their minds as well.
Fair.
But the fact that Dara was kind of able to rally them was really cool. And we've got some of Minervan's, like some of the Minervan slaves that...
We're talking about Milia, right?
Yeah, Milia. Who was she
Milia,
initially?
Dax.
She was initially like a slave of Mars, right?
I don't know that she was.
The mark of Mars becomes that of Minerva.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm having trouble remembering the exact details of this specific section.
So there's a lot here that happens, right? So
right, exactly.
There are conversations that go on basically around the group of Oathbreakers and the houses that they're in originally and how that's handled kind of for all of them going forward.
Yeah, it's a lot of information.
It is, and it's also a lot of it's a combination of a lot of plot and a lot of kind of shifting rules to fit Mustang's guidelines, right? Like you don't want slaves, but maybe you make slaves initially and you make them earn their freedom underneath you, and then you free them from slavery to make them a part of your house. And that's the way that kind of the game is played, so to speak, just to ensure that they're loyal more than anything else. It's not about their productivity. It's not about anything else. It's about loyalty to make sure that they aren't betraying, right?
It is about loyalty, but it also leans on the sort of myth of the Reaper.
Right. Which is why I think...
In a way of gaining credibility.
Oh, totally. Which is why I think that earlier section that we just talked about is so important, because it leans on the myth. It leads them to leave and run away and maybe tell more people about the myth of the Reaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in the Fitchner section that we talked about too, we talked about the one-eyed devil. Like Fitchner talks about the one-eyed devil, as well as the jackal. So it's kind of interesting how those things get juxtaposed. You know, in addition to, okay, well, maybe I need to create a story around myself. How do I do that? He's not doing that intentionally at first, but now that he's realized what he can do, he starts to kind of do it intentionally.
then they attack. Who do they attack first?
They ultimately raid a group in Mars. So they raid a group of Mars troops after they get Milia, right? Mm-hmm. Because there are continuous battles between Mars and Jupiter as they continue to attack each other wave after wave of cavalry. Cassius jumping in, everything else. Ultimately, Darrow says, speed is our strategy, speed and extreme prejudice. And they move on from that. They ultimately take out the 4 Hydrafts that are watching a dozen slaves. And in that freeing of those slaves, they add to their group a number of people, including the prize, Pax. Which, getting Pax is huge. Of course.
Oh, Pax.
Oh, Pax out Telemanus. So we get both Pax
out Telemanus.
Pax out Telemanus. We get both Pax and Tactus added to the army, which is great. Mm-hmm. Pax and Tactus added to the army.
And Tactus was Minervan, right?
Diana.
Yep.
The Woods people. Yep.
Oh, yes. The Woods people. Tactus was what was it? Severo's belly buddy?
Yeah, later. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that term.
The horse belly
That's
buddy.
Later on though.
Yeah. It's definitely good. And I also like the moment that Pax kind of has with Darrow. It's very like it's interesting because it shows a varied respect that's came from the duels that they've had over time. You know, Pax almost killed him in the first duel by like crunching him to death with his arms and everything else.
After tackling his fucking horse.
Yeah. And then Darrow kicked him in the balls like 5 times versus both of them, right? And then finally, like Darrow won a second duel with his sling blade that Pax is just not ready for. Right.
After like not having to finish that fight, but deciding to.
It's their relationship, their friendship and growth is interesting because it's one out of like mutual respect.
Yeah, it's born out of respect and understanding of each other's like abilities on the battlefield, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, and that's truly what Pax respects, I think, more than anything is physical confrontations. Mm-hmm. But Pax reminds me, if I'm really thinking about it, would be, was it George in Of Mice and Men?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of simple, but big and intimidating and just good at what he does, which is fucking people up.
You know, that's fair. I definitely wouldn't discount that.
Was it George or was George the small guy?
Was it
Lenny?
George and Lenny was the
Lenny.
dude. Yeah, George was the
Lenny.
Yep. So repeat what you just said.
No, I'll let my mistake go.
Well,
I don't read much.
Right,
Lenny is who I'm thinking of. George is, hey there, big guy. Like, take it easy. I don't know. Yeah. George is the more intelligent but smaller and kind of the leader of the two. Whereas Darrow's just big and more intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, Pax is like the size of an obsidian and literally relays a story where he fell in love with an obsidian in New Zealand, no less.
Isn't Darrow almost that big also, though? My understanding is he's not really that much smaller than Pax.
No, he's significantly smaller. So Darrow Pax is over 7 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And Darrow is just barely over 6 feet tall.
No, that can't be true.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like we've talked about him being taller than I was.
Yes, but we were wrong.
Oh.
Right. So.
I swear I remember them saying that he was more than 2 meters tall.
Darrow is about 6'4", if I remember. And Pax is over 7 feet tall.
That's fucking nothing.
Pax is around 7'4". Okay. Yeah, Pax is fucking massive. He's literally meant to be like the paragon of.
He's
kind of like an iron gold, but he isn't actually an iron gold.
He's a little bit taller than my tallest relative,
which is fucking nuts. Unnecessary to mention that fact. So you think yourself a Telemanus, huh?
No. But I think myself a little bit bigger than Darrow now, and it kind of puts things into perspective. Like, I could do this shit.
Okay, PJ.
No.
Okay.
No, I could have sworn we had a conversation about Darrow being bigger than me.
Oh yeah, no, he's 7'1".
There you go.
All right.
There you go. He's barely smaller than Pax.
But still, Pax is fucking huge.
So is Darrow, though.
But Darrow was not 7'1" to begin with. He was 5'10".
Right. Oh, right. Of course. I'm talking now. Like, their interactions have just
5'4".
been...
Oh, my God.
Oh,
anyway.
Yeah. But... I'm talking about their sort of interactions with each other and their mutual respect. And I feel like a lot of that, from Pax's point of view, is the fact that they're kind of on equal footing on the battlefield. And a lot of that has to do with their size.
That's kind of fair. And it definitely, like, they're close to each other, but it's not the same. So moving on from there.
Where are we?
we're on page 289, if you're following there.
Okay, I'm there. I'm just, what are we talking about?
So Darrow proves to be like very clever in these chapters, which I think is kind of a changing of his tune from one of force. You know, he previously talked about himself being a blunt instrument.
Right. But he's also always talked about his ability to understand those sort of think outside the box.
Yeah. Complex
riddles.
Situations.
What did they call that? I don't remember. Anyway, but yes, he is definitely a clever one.
Was there any moment in the Oathbreaker chapter that stood out to you specifically?
No.
Cool. All right, moving forward.
Nope. Not other than just.
Yeah, I know. There's
I
barely
focused
anything
a
to
lot
talk
on
about there.
Pax.
I only had like 3 minutes. It's cool.
I focused a lot on Pax in my thinking.
That's fair. Tactus kind of goes by the wayside. So chapter 36, a second test. So the entire chapter centers around capturing the Ceres ovens and kind of takes the focus of the section of the novel. And man, is the fucking siege awesome. But we'll get to that in a second. I kind of giggled on 293 at Mustang, you know, kind of making an amends to talking with Darrow and being like, you know, you haven't slept near me in a bit. And she makes a joke about like freezing her balls off, you know. I think the relationship is just awesome. Like there's a good amount of humor there. I'm not saying relationship in the lovey-dovey way. I mean, like they're sort of.
I think it's blossoming into that, though.
It is a flirtatious friendship, but I think it actually isn't that dissimilar.
I think both of them want it to be more than that.
Yes. And I'd say that it's not that dissimilar from the way that other golds also interact with other golds, right? Like Tactus talks very similarly to the way that Mustang does. Mustang just adds like relationship inflections to some degree, right? Where she's like, there's almost like an undertone of expectation.
Almost a double speak to it.
Yeah, right. But I giggled at that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's fair.
We get this awesome battle for taking the castle, which is just phenomenal. We find out that Ceres has dogs now, somehow, from the Proctors, probably.
I think they caught and domesticated wolves.
I don't think so, because Ceres has refused to leave their walls, for the most part.
They lured the wolves in.
Okay. I'm going with no.
Yep. No, I'm with you.
But I kind of like it's tough because obviously it's animals and like you don't want to laugh or like cry at anything. But like the fact that Darrow just like literally throws one off the rampart is both funny, kinda, and also brutal because it's a dog. Like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that.
Oh, I'm looking at this page, at page 294, and I see the word Helldiver, and I'm thinking about something that I think happened way farther back, but I'd like to revisit.
Yeah, do it.
And that was Mustang's challenge to Darrow for some of the dexterous-based activities that were quote-unquote impossible to like move one hand one way and like twirl a baton in the other hand a different direction. And he just fucking does it.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's actually a really good point. I totally skipped over that. That entire like lesson between the two of them is very fascinating as far as it goes with their relationship, because it's like, well, you can't like rub your stomach and pat your head at the same time, can you? But he's like, yeah, I fucking can. It very much like felt like that. She's like, all right, let me break your thumb real quick and we'll prove the point.
Exactly.
But yeah, it speaks into the narrative of their plan with slaves and how to make slaves actual people as they should be, because you don't want to lead slaves, you want to lead people who believe in you.
The barking of dogs.
Yep.
We look like squirrels, not wolves.
Yep. They're obviously all wearing their wolf cloaks because they've been hunting and living in them forever. Smell like rotting flesh until they finally clean it out. Except for Pax, who can't find one until there's a bear later, and maybe that fits. But
I loved that so much.
Yeah.
I loved that specifically because this weekend I was camping and it was way too fucking cold. It was like, I don't know, 20 degrees, 15 degrees, something overnight. And I couldn't fit into the sleeping bag. It just wasn't long enough for me. So I had to like duck into it. But like over the course of the night, I obviously wasn't like maintaining that position. So I was just fucking freezing throughout it. And it made me think of Pax trying to fit into a wolf pelt.
Pax Telemanus failing to fit into a wolf pelt. Yeah, he was probably pretty cool, but he's large, so it's fine, right? Is that how you felt?
Yep, I think that's the message I'm trying to get across is I'm large, so it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
I really liked Milia's line on 295 as well, talking about the dogs, or the line about Milia rather. She bites a dog in the neck and punches it in the balls till it whimpers off. It's like, wow, whoa, whoa.
First
dude.
of all, how do you get into a position where you can do both of those at once?
I mean, the dog is between your legs, right? And it's like you're munching on its neck.
Yeah, I guess
just munching
so.
on it, and then you're just punching it underhand, low jabs.
Low jabs. Real low jabs.
Low impact.
Below the wolf belt. Or the dog belt.
Oh, no.
Which...
but yeah, this entire... all of the scene is just so great, right? Because then we move to them like jumping down to the gate and barely repelling it. And Millie is shooting people with arrows, trying to get them to stand back. And they finally open the gate. And who comes charging through? Pax out, Telemanus! Pax out, Telemanus! And he picks up a boy by the legs and uses him as a club. Which just... what?
Boys and girls fly through the air like chaff on reaping day.
Yeah, which is great. So before we move on from this, though, I wanted to ask the question about the adaptation. If you had to pick someone that wasn't the Mountain for Pax, who would you pick?
Oh, it'd be animated.
Oh, come on.
No, I don't know. I'm seeing like when I'm... Everything else in my mind is like actual real life, but Pax is an animation. I don't know why. Legitimately, I've been trying to think about this. And all I can imagine is Pax as a cartoon. But to be perfectly frank, I think you'd have to do something similar to, but opposite of the hobbits in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and take somebody and make them bigger, superimpose them to be bigger.
Gotcha.
Because I don't necessarily see them like the I don't see him as the Mountain, where he's this like, he's obviously tall, but he's also fucking wide.
Yep.
I see him more as, not skinny, but just kind of
two shape,
almost like a Spartan in Halo.
Yeah.
Like he's just kind of really tall and jacked, but not
imposing without having all of the weight associated with it. Got it.
Yes. Really, yeah, a Spartan from Halo is kind of what I imagine without the armor, obviously. So I don't know who could play him really well. I don't know like young actors that well. I don't know actors at all that well, but it'd have to be somebody really young and super tall. Probably an up and coming basketball player.
So I don't think that's a bad call. If I had to choose right now under the gun, I would say you could convince me that like Charlie Hunnam could play this character as the way he built himself out like a beast. He's in the most like recent Guy Ritchie movie. He's been in 2 Guy Ritchie movies actually.
What was the most recent Guy Ritchie movie?
The Gentleman?
Aladdin?
The Gentleman. Sorry.
Okay.
He was in that one, and he was the main character in King Arthur. He was also in Pacific Rim.
Oh, okay.
He played Arthur in King Arthur, but also he played one of the main characters in The Gentleman, which was excellent. But
I haven't seen The Gentleman.
Needless to say, in King Arthur, he was jacked beyond belief, and I think in general, he kind of embodies the kind of like bright-faced aggressiveness that I'd expect out of Pax. However, I do agree with you where you kind of have to play with it on film, where you have the guy film his shit on step stools and step ladders because he has to be that much taller. It's not that he's short, and he is 40, but he also looks young enough where I think you could portray it for the duration.
Oh, no, I don't think you could do that. It's got to be a kid. He's 16.
Yeah, but they all kind of like look young and like they sound like they're 16, but they act like they're 26, and I don't think they're 16. Like there's no part of
16 to 26. Even if you go with 26, I feel like you can't put a 40-year-old in that role.
But he did King Arthur as a teen in King Arthur. So I guess
for a short period of time.
That was 3 years ago.
For a very small.
So
no. But as a teen, like he was only a teen in that movie for like a couple scenes.
Yeah, I just think I think he's as close as I can get without looking at actors that are inconsequential. So if I had to pick a big name, I would pick Charlie Hunnam or someone like him, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I feel like he fits the bill, and if you could cast someone that's younger like him, kudos. Yeah.
So the opposition, and what I don't think it should be, is someone like Andre the Giant.
Yes. Yeah.
He's obviously fucking huge, but I think he's too wide and bulky to be this character. Like he would fit the height, but he wouldn't fit the slenderness that I think he kind of needs to be to fit this role.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I had thought about that because I was actually going to make comment about Andre earlier, because there are moments where he's kind of swinging the big club, and it kind of feels like almost like a Lord of the Rings troll to some degree. But I also feel like that's disingenuous to the way that his character is, where he does kind of have a nobility about him. Although there's the counterpoint is inside of The Princess Bride, Andre the Giant plays a very noble, dude. We were led to believe at a certain point that Pax might be mentally slow, but he's not. He acts
mentally slow. He's certainly not as mentally sharp as Darrow.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's a gold and he's gotten this far kind of guarantees that he's got some wits about him.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't let people that are dull this far in the competition.
Unless they're blunt instruments like Titus. Like there's a degree of that makes it through.
Yeah, but I think even Titus had some
It's the exception more than it is the rule, but yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I track.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
Moving on from Pax, we move towards Tactus, the other character here, the other external character that I think is the main focus in these sections. And we kind of hit his like 3 rebellions, right? So his first rebellion, the first thing that I want to mention before we talk about the rebellions is that Tactus is what we call an iron gold. He is one who has blood descended from the actual golds who did the conquering of Earth, meaning that he's a descendant of the first people that laid siege to Earth and set forth the society. So he's considered an iron gold.
Okay.
So he's kind of like a pure blood to some degree and has survived that long. His family has survived that long. So the first of his indiscretions is he ties up a man in his hair with womanly pigtails and defies Darrow. When Darrow asks him, he kind of gets in his face about it, says that he's an iron gold, explains that. He then tries to rape a Ceres girl. And to some degree, for Darrow, it's kind of Titus all over again in some ways. How did you feel about how Darrow handled it? It's on 302.
302. Okay. I'm a couple pages behind.
Yep. There's kind of a lot of this in there.
Yeah, there is. Fucking brutal. Genius. And could be exploited in some ways, I think. I don't think anyone would, and I think if he got a whiff that anyone was trying to kind of game his threat, he'd be kind of all over it anyway. But
when you say threat,
taking
explain
a whipping
the situation. So explain the scene.
So he essentially does he actually go through with whipping Titus?
Tactus. Yes.
Tactus.
He whips him 20 times.
He does, but then makes Tactus whip him, correct?
Yep.
And Pax, after Tactus proves not to be strong enough to do it, he like makes Pax take over. Mm-hmm. And that is something so unheard of. I think more than anything, the fact that that's something that's not been seen by any of these golds as a sort of, I say it as a threat because I think it was a threat. I think it was a show of force and a show of power and a show of strength to take on a whipping of his own and to call out that he's not being whipped hard enough and take the biggest fucking guy and make him whip him. It really bonds them to him, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the things that I find very interesting too about the whole ordeal is obviously on the front end, like Tactus was, and there's some debate for a moment, right? Like Nyla, who's the Ceres slave who was almost raped by Tactus, says no, he doesn't deserve punishment. Like whatever, we can roll through this as long as it's acknowledged by you. That's okay. And Darrow disagrees and says that it needs to be more extreme. But also Mustang says, did your punishment of Titus actually earn you any respect? Or Darrow's thinking that in his head. And it obviously didn't in the factor that he wanted it to. It caused things to be worse. It sort of strained relationships. And so his entire analysis has to be very different approaching how do I build Tactus? Because like while he can be occasionally a vile person, he's also kind of important to Darrow and Darrow's everything else. Like he's I don't want to say he's a replacement for Roke, but he's kind of like a filler in a similar circumstance, right? He's tactical, but he's
definitely filling a similar role.
Yeah, right.
Has some transgressions, obviously, but is someone close to him.
Yeah.
Unlike Titus.
Right. So Tactus actually has like a relationship with him. And so he has to handle this differently. And also, like you said, it sets an example for everyone else. It's a threat to everyone else where it's like, if you defy me, it's not only going to be you that takes the punishment, it's going to be me because I allowed it. And therefore, going forward, also expect you to get more extreme punishment if you disobey the sort of like loyalty that we've created. between all of us, which I like. I think it's very interesting.
I do, going a little bit backwards, back to the middle of 303, when his arms are weak and so is his will to do it. It still stings, but I stood up after 5 lashes and give the lash to Pax. They start counting at 6. Start over, I shout. A little rapist cur can't swing hard enough to hurt me, but Pax bloody well can.
Yeah, that's...
Just the use of the word cur, I love.
Especially because he said, like, in the previous page as well, like, you deserve to have your balls off, you selfish bastard, he whispered to Tactus. I agree with you. I think that it's so interesting how it feels very counter the Apocalypse Now scene with all of the other scenes that we ever seen with like drill sergeants, like being like, get the fuck up, or like telling people like to do push-ups. It's like, no, I'm going to do the push-ups because you fucked up and I'm also the drill sergeant. It feels sort of counter in that way, which is interesting.
It does. And I don't know if it's just so different that it's kind of shocking his followers into
submission.
Yeah. I don't know if submission is right.
It's not. It's as close as we can get, though. I agree with you on that. Obedience.
But that's fair. Loyalty.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also weeds out anybody who potentially isn't in it to actually follow him. That hasn't come up so far. I think it's simultaneously a kind of a show of force and a show of compassion. Strangely, like whatever transgressions we make, I make, and I'll take the fall for it. But also, I can fucking take the fall for it. It's hard to describe exactly the feelings that I would have as a follower of his if I saw this happen. There's intimidation, there's respect, there's understanding his passion for the cause that they're leading towards.
I totally agree with you. I feel like it doesn't do... There's no better justice than what's said afterwards, right? On 304, the end of this chapter, you know, after standing up from this brutal lashing from Pax, he says, "You do not follow me because I am the strongest, Pax is. You do not follow me because I am the brightest, Mustang is. You follow me because you do not know where you are going. I do." And he motions towards Tactus to come toward me. He wavers, pale, confused as a newborn lamb. Fear marks his face. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the pain I willingly bore. Fear when he realizes how different he is from me. And that, I think, is that moment when it's like, okay, I understand the difference between me being a peerless scarred or just a gold and me being a primus, one that should be in charge of everything else. And I feel like that's a realization to some degree for Tactus. Yeah. And then the Blood Brothers right?
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
I pull him forward into a hug. We are Blood Brothers, you little shit. Blood Brothers.
Yeah.
I'm learning.
With, later in the section, I think it's not this chapter, but next, they make jokes about like Tactus getting a hard on from his scars on his back. And Darrow's like, what the fuck? Anyway, yeah, totally great chapter and an incredible arc for Darrow and Tactus.
Kind of a chilling, not conclusion, but climax to that chapter, though.
Oh yeah, that was a total goose flesh moment for me. I didn't mention it, but like that passage that I just read, it's like, oh, shudders. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, such good prose.
Here's where we start getting into, like, they're going south. The title of chapter 37 is South. But this chapter, I think, is the first chapter where we start interacting with the Proctor Apollo, right? And this is where I'm coming from when I like distinctly remember that it's wintertime, because they know this, like know that Apollo's following him because of the straight line marks in the snow following him.
Yep, from the grab boots over top of the snow. So they know that they're being trailed by proctors, which is interesting. Of course. I also like something to track on 308. I kind of love fake weak Darrow in these conversations and like his entire army kind of playing coy and soft when it comes to like talking to Novas. Like they almost act totally benign as far as like a tumor goes in the whole game. Like they're the benign tumor, but yeah.
Right. Is this where he starts kind of like limping?
Oh yeah, he's
and moving forward and like calling out.
Yep, he fakes a limp. He pretends like he's not the Reaper. You know, Novas has no idea really of what's going on. Obviously, Apollo knows, and I also appreciate like the traps that are laid right for Apollo and Novas. The like horse screams that happen as like Pax had gone out and some other people had gone out and axed out the ice earlier to make it soft, and so they like lose all their horses. And it's just it's an interesting section. It's pretty quick, but I feel like that kind of sums it up. Is like it's also like a selling of like how bad some of the other golds are at being tactical. Like there are idiots that are also golds.
Yeah. Not necessarily idiots.
Idiot's the wrong word, but I mean like they're not as smart.
I think it's just that Darrow knows exactly how they think.
So you're saying he's playing to them?
He is. He clearly is. He's saying like he's thinking, I know that if I do this, they'll come raid my camp at night. So let's lay a trap exactly where I know they'll be coming from. I think it's not that any of the golds are bad tacticians. I think that Darrow is just very good at playing against good tacticians.
Fair. I can see that.
And I think that was born out of necessity when he was kind of trying to vie for power outside of his own camp.
Fair. I also really like in this section kind of Tactus's sort of pre-boy dialogue. It's just so distinct from other characters, I think. Like he's got kind of this like sharpness and insanity about him that's kind of just like it's just like a chef's kiss on top of the whole thing, especially like 310 to 311. He kind of just like goes on his own solitary rants about like, what do I do, dear leader? And like he mentioned some of these other things. You know, obviously they're talking about the fact that they've been tracked through the snow. As you mentioned, his lips curl into a feral smile. A pleasure, good Reaper. It's just interesting, like made speak. It's great. I love it. Go ahead.
Oh, I just good Reaper.
Yeah,
is a good name.
We quickly find after portions of this chapter, the proctors are obviously trying to sabotage his chances by cutting his horses loose. So suddenly Darrow has no horses. Doesn't really matter. Darrow gets lured away by Mustang's voice, but very quickly this time versus other times catches on to it being a trap. Gets kicked off of a tree branch by Mr. Proctor Apollo and is faced by a bear. Duh, bears.
Which we kind of alluded to this before. That bear is then worn by Pax.
So so originally in my calendar, I'd cut off the chapter here because I wanted to think about what you thought about the bear and how that would go forward. I decided that the next cliffhanger was better, so I moved it forward kind of at the last minute. But all things considered, the threat of the bear is so short-lived. How shocked were you that Severo showed up here?
Not as shocked as I think you thought I would have been.
Okay.
Would have been surprised, certainly. Certainly surprised. But I figured he'd be coming back. And there's not that many pages left in the book.
Okay. Okay.
Like, it's a little metagamey as far as an answer goes, but it's the truth. I love that he came back. Mm-hmm. I didn't expect him to be the aforementioned one-eyed devil.
Yes. We'll talk about that in a second, which I think is worth the conversation. I find the nagging question in this book, overlying everything else, is that there's kind of a where's Waldo, but it's where's Severo all the time. It's like, I don't know where he is. Where's he hanging out? What's going on? And
what's he doing?
Where is Severo? And we kind of finally get the answer in this chapter, which I enjoy. But also, you'd mentioned this earlier. Severo and Tactus are ever friendly again on 317. Why the limp, my friend? Your mother rode me ragged. But you had to stand on your tiptoes to even kiss her chin. Wasn't her chin I was trying to kiss. And Darrow just like finishes that entire thought with, they are two very peculiar people. It's just
that. I mean, they are,
as you had mentioned previously, like horse buddies or whatever it is.
Belly
buddies. Yeah, God.
Why if it isn't my belly buddy?
It's so good and interesting. I love that little bit there from the dead
also,
horses.
The Minervans fear him.
Yep.
Tactus and the other single word, dead horses.
Yep.
I think that's the only time that's mentioned as far as a title goes.
Yeah, because
so it kind of seems like a throwaway title, but it was interesting that it was written that way, I guess.
And to a large extent, the dead horses are the Howlers plus the House Diana members that also stuck it out. So
I'm thinking the way I took it was the dead horses were the House Diana members.
Fair.
That allied with the Howlers.
Sure. I can read that
but
way.
Because of the previous sentence, the Minervans feared him, Tactus and the other dead horses.
That's fair.
It seems unimportant to really break that down further than that.
Sure. But like you had mentioned, Severo lost an eye. And he also, explains a couple of different things. I think he obviously talks about the Jackal, which we'll get to in a second. But I liked the way that their friendship grew from this moment when he brought Darrow back the sling blade, right? It's great. It solidifies that they are friends beyond this moment because no matter what, Severo has always been there for Darrow, despite his looming insanity.
But Severo is very on top of reality, I think. And that's kind of explained at the bottom of the same page we were just reading, 317. I always wondered what sort of mad little fellows you Howlers were, Mustang says. Little? Severo asks. I didn't mean to offend. He grins. I am little.
True. True.
Like he's willing to just kind of make people uncomfortable about any sort of comments they make, fully understanding the reality of what is.
Mm-hmm. There's an underlying comedy to the way that Severo reacts to everything that is very good. In the way that a comedian can bring things to light that people are unwilling to say. Severo is kind of that for Golden Society and the Institute in certain ways.
Speaking of film adaptation, a very young version of the actor that played Rorschach,
James Earl Hale.
Is that, I don't know who it is.
It's James Earl Hale.
But just kind of long face with a large mouth.
Is who you
kind of scrawny, small.
Sorry, Jackie Earl Hale. That's his name.
That when I'm imagining what he looks like, he looks a lot like that guy, but a teenager.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think you're not that far off, especially given his height and stature and everything else.
And disposition. And the way he carries himself within that film, as he is small and he kind of carries himself as a meek character for the most of it outwardly to the public, but is pretty ruthless and definitely can hold his own.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I feel like he would be a good casting if he wasn't, almost 60 years old.
Right.
Which, I do agree with you that, I feel like he plays kind of the same sort of, there's almost a ruggedness to Severo too that's necessary. Well,
of course, he's the kid who's been wanking off in the woods for several months.
Which, by the way, may I mention to /r the Reddit Red Rising, the fact that is the follower tag there is hilarious. That I giggled.
What is it?
It's literally if you're on the Red Rising Reddit subreddit at all, it is so many users wanking off in the bushes. However many people are online, or however many people are subscribed, are wanking off in the bushes. And
that's hilarious.
So presently, at the time of this reading, 16,674 howlers are wanking off in the bushes. And just too good.
That's pretty great.
Speaking of, real quick shout out, we got our first comment from a Reddit subscriber. Black Boy Yee is listening now, so that's a cool ad. Maybe feature that later.
Oh,
it's cool. Anyway, so yeah, I love the reintroduction of Severo here. It's great. We kind of move on from that joke, obviously, to the jackal. Right? We get the introduction of a reality of the jackal, which is to say that like the jackal tore out Severo's eye, the knife, which isn't great, obviously. And we also get
I think that's a pretty bad thing.
We also get the rest of the story of the jackal, though, right? Inside these pages. Am I crazy? I'm trying to remember what that is.
Does he ever describe him?
Doesn't he say?
I don't think he really does.
On 321, right? He doesn't actually describe the person, but he tells about what the jackal did.
Right.
So before we get to that, though, I think there's one other important thing to mention. I kind of skipped over it. Where they talk ringless, right? Where they all decide to pull off their rings, but there are plans to make and gods to undo, is what Darrow says in his head. They all take off their rings, of which Darrow knows are monitored. They're obviously the cameras that everyone else sees through. What do you think they discussed with the rings off? Because it's actually not told to us what they talked about. What do you think information was passed?
My assumption is he tells them about the fact that the proctors are watching and that the rings are cameras and that they need to be even more careful about their plans because none of it is going to be actually secret. They need to act as if it is, and they need to make plans that can still be done, augmented potentially by having the rings off. But any sort of planning that to do with their rings on has to be done in a way that it doesn't actually give away too much to the proctors of the houses that they're attacking. That was my assumption.
Totally fair. I think that's good.
And I didn't know up until later on when it seemed like they all knew after talking to Apollo. And the fact that Severo goes running after meeting with, after drinking all of Apollo's wine.
True. That's actually a really funny moment, right? Because
it's a great moment.
It's great. We'll get there in a second. So we also get kind of the gradual raids on Apollo, right? Kind of post their conversation. We get like them carving the symbol of the Reaper. They're raiding halls. They're raiding forts. They aren't actually hitting the castle, but any of the outlying territory. They've made their mark, which is interesting. Spreading kind of the legend of the Reaper, letting all the slaves free, not actually capturing anyone because they want people to go and talk.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. But then on 321, we finally figure out how the jackal himself got his name. Right. Which is some wicked shit. We only get like a paragraph's worth of space, but it describes him so well.
Yeah. When you hear jackal, what do you think? Not in context of this book. When you hear the term jackal, what's your first thought?
Well, PJ, I think of Mike Birbiglia and Walla Walla, Washington.
Okay.
No,
you think of that.
But also, like taking it out of the Mike Birbiglia joke context, my first thought of a jackal is it's a sort of almost a more desperate version of a hyena. You know, it's to me, it reminds me of the sort of haunting guys from The Lion King taking out 3 stretches of starvation to like a desperate dog.
I can see that, and it can kind of play in parallel with my thought, which comes strictly from Halo. Like rooted in my memory and my understanding of what a jackal is are the shielded Covenant snipers.
Okay.
Or I guess whatever they are.
Yeah, they've got a weak spot.
Maybe not snipers,
Right.
but they've got a very small weak spot, but mostly they're a real small, frail, elongated, I guess, yeah, almost hyena-like being that's a little bit ruthless and a little bit desperate. So the fact that he comes from collapsing tunnels in on himself and living there for several weeks with only water until he and his compadres carve their way out, kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So I think what you kind of skip over there is the fact that, like, how do you survive in a tunnel for a month with only potentially up to 40 people because 10 of their high drafts died, right? Like, the option is cannibalism. Does that not shock you?
If a jackal is caught in a trap, it'll chew off its own leg.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Whew. Anyway.
I mean, that says a lot about his will, but it doesn't necessarily say a lot about his actual physical. I mean, it says a little bit about his relative physical kind of lording over the rest of his tribe, in that he was able to overcome everybody else that was weaker. But it doesn't necessarily say that he's a super, like, crazy strong person. And the fact that there's been a bribe to get him to win, and they're doing everything they can to uphold that bribe, tells me, A, he's probably pretty good. He's probably, like, doing pretty well on his own. But it also tells me he's probably not necessarily good enough to win, which tells me that there's a lot more cheating that Darrow's going to be facing.
Okay. Interesting. I definitely see where you're coming from. I feel like the initial circumstance is that the jackal got kind of backed into a corner and made a tactical decision to do what he did. But also, yeah, I'm not saying that the rest of it isn't showing the cheating, but, like, people like Lilath, right, came out of that. They're okay. And House Pluto very clearly still has scouts and other people that exist. So they made it out of that initial situation where all of the Medbots rushed to the south, right?
I don't necessarily believe that Lilath is not in on it.
Okay. Well, in on the whole conspiracy of, like, cheating to win.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like, they found themselves in a cave-in, and the proctors came down, kind of let everyone know, hey, this guy's going to win. We're going to make sure he wins. You guys are going to get plush, well-paying jobs going forward, or we'll kill you if you let anybody else know that you're complicit in this conspiracy.
They're doing this.
That's my thought.
Okay. I dig that.
They've been outfitted with bones and teeth to make themselves look more intimidating. Ion blades and horses before everybody else had the same opportunities. Like, everything is going in their favor, despite dealing with a cave-in, whether or not that actually happened. But where's that story coming from?
That story is being told by Severo.
Okay. I trust him. I guess that depends on where he heard that story as well. My stupid conspiracy theory brain makes me think that everything coming from that is total bullshit. And all they really have to worry about is actually fighting the proctors that are supplying them with all the weapons.
Okay. I dig that. And I also feel like that feeds into kind of the next part of the conversation, right? Which this chapter is the fall of House Apollo. And we also talked to the face of House Apollo in Proctor Apollo, right? He shows up to a campfire between all of the lieutenants of Darrow's and sits himself down with the pulse spear, everything else. And also reveals that he's got a jam field going on. We talked about the flagon of wine. What do you think his purpose was here outside of, like, just general fear mongering?
I think just straight up intimidation.
Okay.
I think it was intimidation veiled as trying to reason and trying to show how unprepared you are to deal with what you've got in front of you. But I think it was really just like, hey, you're actually fighting me.
Mm-hmm. There are moments there that basically say that, like, you're actually competing against me, and there are other proctors hovering above. Severo is obviously taking a flagon of wine, snuck out with it, ran. They make jokes about it. I
didn't even sneak out.
Right. He just walked
said,
off.
I'm taking a piss. I drank all your wine.
Yeah. Which is, it's great. I love the way that Severo is used as kind of a utility wrench, so to speak. Like
this is clearly something that was discussed when their rings were off, because it had to have been.
Right. Because
there's no way it could have been discussed otherwise, and it was clearly something planned out. Like a plan, like we know how quickly Severo can run 2 kilometers. That was discussed.
1.5 minutes, maybe faster.
1.5 minutes, but Severo's a liar, so probably faster. I think it was something like that.
Yeah, that's Mustang's line.
But they clearly have the plan of how to take down House Apollo very quickly, single-handedly. So I think that is precisely what was discussed without the rings.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So to round out the chapter, we have the rest of the conquering of House Apollo, which is obviously facilitated by Severo, as we'd mentioned. He runs and with the other members begins to take down the house. They very quickly infiltrate and take down everyone, with the exception of a horse girl who runs away. Mustang quickly rides after her, gets her, and captures the standard of Apollo.
Not only runs away, jumps off of the tower and mysteriously floats down with some like distortion around her.
Right. Like they were trying to save the girl so that Apollo could stay in the entire fight. However, because the goal is to eliminate Apollo's entire force, because if Apollo is eliminated entirely and made slaves, then Apollo, the proctor, has to go home. And he cannot hang out anymore on Olympus.
So my problem with that, and it might be the last sentence, or very close to it, of this chapter. He says something, "You're through, I taunt Apollo. Your house has fallen. My army roars once more. I bask in the sound of the winter air as sun peeks over the western lips of the valleys. Marion, what is that word?
What page?
Marineris? 3rd paragraph down.
Valles Marineris.
Valleys Marinera.
Marineris. ISE.
No, I know.
Marineris.
No, that's not quite
Mariner.
It. But he mentioned,
but then you add the plural.
No, I've moved past the pronunciation because I don't care that much. He mentioned at some point that Apollo now has to leave because those are the rules, and I thought that to be very kind of short-sighted because nobody's followed the rules so far. I don't think that's the last we deal with
Apollo.
Proctor Apollo.
Okay. All right.
Because of how over the top he was about, I can't find the actual sentence, but he says you have to leave. Those are the rules. Something like that.
Yeah. Right.
And it just seems so innocent and naive.
Right.
Especially given how much he's already seen these proctors cheat. And he's taking Fitchner on his single word of once their house is gone, the proctors have to leave. But it's not like that's a set in stone law.
Right. It's not as though
it's just kind of a passing comment from Fitchner.
So much of the society is based on, so far as we're aware, social paradigms, and they've broken so many to let the jackal go that it feels like it's crumbling. It's all based on meritocracy, but now, in fact, we're seeing it being based on who can pay the most. It's more oligarchical.
Oligarchical is a fun word.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the chapter?
Yeah, no, it is. When they start chanting the name Reaper.
Of course.
Or Darrow. Do they start chanting Darrow? I think they chant his actual name.
Darrow, Andromedus. Darrow, Andromedus. Darrow, Andromedus. I think it's
not actually
Reaper.
Said, though.
I think they actually chant Reaper.
Then Pax bellows my name. And then Titus's voice echoes it. the Nyla from the Far
Tactus.
Tower. And soon 100.
Is dead.
Jesus, I keep fucking that up.
I know.
Whatever. All it says is my name. It doesn't say. They chant. The last sentence is they chant the name of the Reaper at the Proctors because they know whom we now fight. But it doesn't say if it's Reaper or Darrow, Al,
Andromedus.
Pegasus.
Andromedus, you fuck. It's okay. Yeah.
Regardless,
No.
it doesn't explicitly say one way or another. I assumed it was the name Darrow.
Agreed. It's definitely Darrow. Al Andromedus, I think. It could be like Darrow, Al Andromedus Reaper, Darrow, Al
Specifically
Andromedus
because
Reaper.
it's Pax that starts it. And I don't think Pax starts it with Reaper.
No, yeah, he's all about the full names. Pax, Ow, Telemanus.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to stop reading.
You didn't? You
That's
wanted to keep going?
a theme. I wanted to keep going. Of course I wanted to keep going.
It goes without saying. My dad read this entire book after I recommended it to him in a day and a half. My brother has since picked it up to read along with us and has tore through the book in the last week. And so the fact that we're trying so badly to pace this out as well as we have is honestly an incredible statement on your patience, because holy fuck, does this book just not beg you to take the next page?
That's all I want to do. And I'll probably do that right after.
Cool. What were your favorite moments from this week's reading? Any in particular you'd call out?
I think the reunions. All of the reunions, specifically that of Pax and Darrow, and that of Severo, and I keep wanting to say Titus. Jesus Christ, why can't
Tactus? So actually,
why am I so bad at that? Why do I constantly?
It's
think
actually
of that
not your fault. So
incorrectly?
Something that a number of authors have talked about, but George R.R. Martin popularized to some degree, modern popularization, is when you're writing a book, take the letters of the alphabet and try to not duplicate the letters as much as you possibly can. So try to roll through the whole alphabet with each of your characters so as to reduce this repeat problem. So you don't have people with T.
Okay, I can see that.
You know.
This has both the same first letter and the same
Last sound.
ending syllabus. Not syllable. Jesus. What the fuck is
syllable?
Syllable. Syllable's the right word. Tactus and Titus. They sound like brothers.
But they're not.
They are not. Yeah, but those reunions, I think, were my favorite moments.
Okay.
And the Reaper song.
Yeah. That stood out to you, huh?
It did.
Cool.
Of course it did. How could that not?
You know what? What's really interesting is on my first listen through, it was a great moment, but I wasn't able to pick it apart as well because I was listening to it, if that made sense. Like it was not. It wasn't
fair.
something where I could go line by line and tear it apart. So
and like let me say here, like me tearing it apart was technically after finishing the chapter.
Yeah.
Like I didn't tear it apart like I did while we were recording in my first read through, because a lot of it was kind of thinking back on it after getting through this section. I definitely had a lot of it in my mind while I was reading forward.
Of course. I just think it's not as easy to do when you're listening to it. So to actually like again re-engage and reread through it, part of me is you want to reread like, oh yeah, here's this. And so it didn't resonate with me this time, but it's cool to hear that it was still so important and resonant to you.
The other thing is something that we never really touched on. We kind of glossed over it, was the use of the pulse spear.
Yeah.
In the final showdown.
I kind of talked about it. He showed up at the campfire with the pulse spear.
Yeah, but this wasn't against Apollo. Mm-hmm. It was clearly given by Apollo. The three proctors scatter after the pulse spear goes through their shielding. I don't know, just more badassery from Darrow.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this chapter. Glad that you enjoyed that. There's so many good moments here. There's so many good moments. It feels weird, but like the chapter Oathbreakers is almost lost because it builds so much of how Darrow and Mustang like decide to take part in their grouping of society and how they're going to move forward. That
even if you like rewind this halfway, I mentioned like I can't really place some specific like thoughts on that chapter because it definitely got lost.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Like the chapter itself is important enough where it warrants conversation, but also it's light enough compared to some of the other events. Like I said at the very beginning of this, like this entire section just feels like laden with really crazy events that it's hard to kind of even think about some of the overall themes if it weren't for the like Reaper's song and if it weren't for some of the specific moments of reunion and other things like that are just throughout this section. Love those highlights. I would definitely agree. I feel like Tactus and Severo's reunion for me is one of the highlights. I love kind of the joking nature and seeing Severo again back together with Darrow is great. And their friendship of handing back the sling blade to Darrow's awesome. Any mysterious questions sitting in your head going forward? Or is there anything that you're kind of questioning?
I mean, obviously the Blossom.
Okay.
I feel like I've resolved that after my conversation with you. I'm curious about what makes this the end of the book.
Yeah, right. We'll get to that in a second.
So we
I want to jog to what you're saying.
Okay. We'll get far. Yeah. We'll get
I feel like that's a good end all question. So if that's where you're leaning, we'll hang out a second. So do you have any suspicions of Mustang?
I mean, yeah, we mentioned this before. I have a creeping suspicion that if she's not a red, she has connections to Eo's family. Maybe not enough to actually know who Darrow is. Maybe though. There's just so many connections there that it makes me hard pressed to believe that there's nothing connecting them somehow.
Sure. Okay. So what do you think happened to Roke?
I think he's still alive. And I still think that he betrayed Darrow. I think him professing his love about Leah was actually him setting the trap for Darrow.
Okay.
So I think he's alive. I don't know if he's leading House Mars or in the leadership of House Mars like he was with Darrow as a member of the War Room. I would believe that he's in a similar high-ranking tactician position under Cassius.
Okay. I like that. So any predilections or updates on who you think Ares is or what you think they are?
I think Fitchner's involved.
Okay.
I still don't know anything else beyond that. It's a toss-up whether or not Dancer is actually the quote-unquote Ares as far as like meaning the head of the organization.
Do you think anyone is Ares?
No. Okay. I think even if Dancer is the head of Ares, I think Ares is an idea that they follow.
Okay.
And isn't necessarily an actual person. It's Ares is their philosophy, and their philosophy comes first. And they're the leader of their group follows that philosophy. So in truth, they can kind of always know where their leadership is heading, as opposed to blindly following a single individual. They have sort of a constitution to follow.
Sure. Okay. I track that, especially as talking about like ideologies and other things like that. That totally makes sense. It's very, oh my God, Polyneuchian, Chuck Palahniuk. Polyneuchian. Like, how the fuck do you say that? It's something like that. His last name is already crazy to pronounce correctly, but it's, crazy in the way where I don't understand, not crazy in the way
no, I can see where you're coming from. I meant it in more of a literally parallel to the U.S. Constitution.
Sure.
As in, I think that's what should be followed, as opposed to the individual mandate and unhinged ideas of a single leader.
Sure.
I think they should have something written in stone to be their guide.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
I took that. So how will Darrow, in the end of this book, we've got 51 pages left, deal with Cassius when the time arrives? Cassius.
Now
I did that for you.
Okay. Well, now I feel pandered to.
Properly.
Properly pandered to. I don't think that's where I'm really curious about what happens here. There's 50 pages left, more or less. What did you say?
There's
51?
literally 51 pages left. Yeah.
And this goes back to almost, I think, the first episode where I asked, was this written in a way that it was intended to be a standalone book and the sequels came after, or was it written as a first part of a series to begin with? And getting this far into the book and having so much to resolve and so few pages left, either I'm going to be sorely disappointed in the resolution that comes forward, or it was written to be kind of the first chunk of a book to begin with. Not that anything's wrong with either way to like start a book, but I'm so excited that there's more to read after this because I know I don't have to like worry about how quickly things will get resolved. And truly, I don't think things get resolved with Cassius in this book.
Okay.
I could see Cassius winning.
Taking Primus of the whole thing.
Well, is that how it's set
Primus
forward?
of the Institute winner, same concept.
Right. So I could see him being the quote unquote winner of this game. And Darrow, all right, here's my guess. Darrow kills the Jackal. Cassius wins the game. Darrow gets taken up by the person we were talking about before, third in line.
Lauren.
How
Rage Knight.
Taken in as sort of the apprentice to him, and things build from there.
Okay.
And Darrow sort of vies to take down the Bolognas from his position as apprentice to Lorne.
And the Augustuses for their awfulness. Right.
I think the Augustuses get taken down. So I think what happens is the Jackal gets killed. Arch-Governor Augustus is pissed. Darrow figures out a way to leak all the information to the general public about the fact that the Arch-Governor has been bribing everything. Mm-hmm. Like bribing the Institute to get his son to win. Obviously, all the parents, like the gold, high-ranking parents of children that died, basically for a rigged game, overthrow the Arch-Governor. Mm-hmm. And the Bolognas take first place.
Okay.
In ranking amongst the society. And Darrow kind of nuzzles in with Lorne as apprentice to second place.
Okay. All right.
And plots from there.
Other thoughts on the end, in addition to that? Just anything else that you've lingering that might resolve?
I want Darrow to kill everybody.
Including Severo?
Yeah,
why?
Absolutely. Because Severo is so like short-sighted about his rage. Like clearly Darrow lied, but anyone could really see that Darrow lied about everything that was happening because he didn't really have a choice for it.
So you literally want Darrow to kill every one of these gold son of a bitches.
Absolutely.
Okay. No one.
Not every one of them, but
the
leader
deserves,
of every remaining house.
Who deserves to survive in your head?
The people that are currently following.
Which includes Severo, kind of.
Oh, sorry, Cassius.
Oh, okay.
I meant Cassius.
All right. Okay.
Sorry, I misheard you. I was
like, Jesus Christ, Severo is the most loyal motherfucker on this planet.
No. I think there's going to be some betrayal from within. I'm not sure by who. I could see it being... I think it'd be from somebody kind of unnamed at this point, but was, I don't know, a member of House Diana. Something. I don't know. I think he'll deal with internal betrayal. Is Vixus still around?
Yes, Vexus and Pollux are still around. But they're with Antonia.
Which one?
Right? Pollux sided with him.
Pollux was the one that kind of sided with him. I think he'll kind of regain that trust.
Okay.
And that'll be a way of infiltrating House Mars. Beyond that, I'm not sure. I think I'd like to see some actual resolution. I don't think we'll actually see that. And I don't think he's the one that wins. I think the fact that he's not been a part of a house means that whenever he kills the second to last house leader, the de facto winner is the other remaining house.
Got it. Interesting.
And I think they just end the game at that point and declare them the winner.
Interesting.
Without fanfare.
Okay.
I could see that happening.
Dude, I'm so excited to conclude these books next week. I'm so excited to talk about the end of this book. God,
I'm going to be so pissed, aren't I? I'm going to be so pissed that I can't just continue.
Dude, you're going to have to wait 2 weeks, which is going to be rough before we jump into Golden Sun after this. But holy shit, is this next section exciting? I'm so excited to talk about the next chunk of the book and even the next book going forward, because wow, does it change and expand. You know, I would agree with some of the sentiment on the front of this book where it compares it to the Hunger Games and other things where it's contained inside of the small space. But holy shit, does the world open up after this? And I'm so excited for those moments. That's not really spoiler,
I can imagine.
It feels good, man. All things considered, I'm so excited for next week. Next week, we finish the book. So next week is our last section on this. The week following, we're going to do a debrief at the same time as we also do the introduction to the next book. So we'll do a 2-fer episode per usual.
Are we doing a 3-fer?
We might do a 3-fer. It's not confirmed.
Because
we might do a short story.
We're probably going to do a short story because I think we've talked about that pretty extensively.
We'll see. I don't think we'll do a 3-fer in the same week, but we might space it out with like
no. But
with a short story, then an intro, then an outro.
As far as like between our last section of this book and the first section of the next book, I think there's going to be 3 episodes. Yeah. I think a debrief of Red Rising, a short story, an intro to the next book.
Right. Which I think will happen. I think the short story happens on its own week, and then we do the intro and the outro. We do the outro and the intro on the same week.
Yeah. That's semantics. Regardless.
I am so excited.
I think
this is the end. What a ride it's been.
Yes. Yeah. It's over, man.
So soon.
I guess so.
So
it's been 2.5 hours.
What are we doing now?
Tell people to follow us to hear what happens next.
And listen to your fucking drunk ass ramble anymore.
No, I don't think they do.
Thank you for listening to Words and Whiskey.
We hope you've built up a tolerance to us. Subscribe to us on your preferred platform like Overcast, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, or whatever else you use.
And check us out at our website, wordsandwhiskey.show. We filled our top shelf with our favorite cocktail recipes as well as other important information for you. Check us out on Instagram and Twitter at wordswhiskeypod. All those links and more can be found in our show notes. A 5-star rating on the platform of your choosing goes a long way to springing us up on them leaderboards and getting us noticed. We're just 2 dudes helping encourage people to read and get out of their comfort zone while thinking critically about literature. Thanks for listening, and we bloody damn better see you next week.